Girls, Fräulein, Senoritas. Welcome to the Outskirts Film Podcast. My name is Öykü Sofolu, and today I'm joined by my co-hosts.
I'm Christopher Small. Hello.
I'm Alonso Hilar.
Those who recognize this line, spoken by a very young and dashing Jeff Goldblum, might have already guessed which filmmaker we'll be talking about in today's episode. For those who didn't, there's every reason to be excited to discover a very unique voice within the landscape of American independent cinema, who is none other than Joan Micklin Silver. I say unique, although her career path can also be observed among several other women filmmakers who rose to prominence in the late 70s and early 80s, such as Martha Coolidge and Susan Seidelman, but whose work gradually became incompatible with an ever-changing system that was increasingly hard to keep up within the late 90s and the 2000s. So far in this podcast, we talked about edgy mavericks like Valerian Borowczyk and Lucio Fulci, whose radical and formal aesthetic obsessions provided us some easy entry points, whereas a figure such as Joan Micklin Silver seems more ambivalent in that her cinema, while being independent, borders on mainstream Hollywood production. Unlike the formal two, these are films that you can easily watch with your parents. So, to start our discussion, I want to ask you guys about what it means to explore her cinema here on Outskirts Film Podcast.
Yeah, I wouldn't say there's like no edge on Joan Micklin Silver films, particularly on Loverboy, which isn't something I would watch with my parents probably. But besides that, I mean, it is interesting because I think there are some like similarities, perhaps in like career path in a way, because we'll get into that, but like towards the end of like her career, I can see like the same kind of like marginalization from like the industry kind of like happens in some way, which I see like a common path in that sense. I mean, I wouldn't say that it's mainstream per se, in the sense that to me they're still very, very much ingrained in a particular context of production in the 70s, which I think is pretty distinctive. And also like with those filmmakers, we kind of discussed during the episodes that they had like this very focused like production period where like their perhaps like author's like reputation came from, but actually when we look at the wider body of work, it showed like to be more like erratic filmmakers and like perhaps more like heterogeneous. So I think there's like some through lines with Silver's work as well. And also, I guess if we want to like keep it perhaps in general sense, also like comedy in a way and horror to me are always kind of related, and this kind of like historically maligned like popular cinemas, like the lowbrow stuff that has taken some time to be reevaluated critically. So I think we're still in safe outskirts ground, I'll say.
I don't necessarily think of a kind of outskirts canon of the sort of filmmakers that we quote unquote should be thinking about, even though we have with Borowczyk and Fulci, I think, thrown down the gauntlet in some way. And in comparison, probably Joan Micklin Silver seems quite tasteful. As Alonso said, there is something kind of marginal about her career. Not only the way it transforms over time and her as a figure, the kind of production context she found herself in, the kind of fights that she had to have, which were also fights for her kind of basic legitimacy as a woman filmmaker. I think there is a tendency when you look back on film, I also do this, when you look back on films like this, to kind of consider them as sort of mainstream in some way, because I mean, they're in the English language, they have like recognizable stars, like you said, Jeff Goldblum at the start of his career and so on, they're funny. But actually a lot of the films by Joan Micklin Silver that I saw this week are not mainstream. I mean, they are independent films that really struggled to find a certain place in a market, particularly towards the start of her career, but also the last film I saw, A Fish in the Bathtub, which has a lot of recognizable stars, but is not a studio film. It's a film produced by her husband. So I think, there is a lot of tension there that in this artist is someone who like very much started as someone truly independent, came out of a certain dramatic New York context and really had to struggle to make films. And then at some point, maybe in this kind of a trajectory that both Borowczyk and Fulci have had too, they slide into a certain kind of irrelevancy or kind of difficulty to combine their personal expression with the kind of films that they're able to make. If you look at Joan Micklin Silver's last few films, they are TV movies for Showtime. But I also want to maybe turn the question back on you, Urku, because you suggested Joan Micklin Silver, I think, without having seen any of her films as a subject.
Why did I do that? I actually discovered her work, or let's say her name, quite lately, and there was this retrospective in Belfort Entrevue Film Festival this year, and I think it was in November, and I was so busy at that time, and I couldn't see any of these films, and I was like, I want to see and talk about these films in some occasion. So maybe it was a selfish initiative from my own perspective, but I just wanted to discover without having any premeditated expectations from her filmography, let's say.
And I know for Fulci, you had a lot of trepidation about where to start. So where did you start with Joan Micklin Silver?
I'm a simple girl. I always start with the first films, but I think in her case, I think Hester Street is a good film to start with, because it's quite different from the rest of her filmography, and there's a very peculiar, particular film with every aspect, whether it's production, whether it's aesthetics. So since it's her first feature that has been widely recognized and appreciated, won an Oscar nomination to Carol Kane, then for a woman filmmaker, the most important question is, then what? The second feature or the second film. So I think these gradual steps in her career is mostly motivated by economical questions and not necessarily thematic. I think in an ideal world, that would be an artist's dream, to pursue a particular interest through your own taste or your own curiosity at that time, but it's mostly motivated by which scripts are available, which producers you can find, for which subject you can raise money for. And I think that you can clearly observe those meditations, those choices in her work, because we usually tend to analyze these films through themes, as if the author is this omnipresent force that can decide what they want to talk or depict. But actually, especially in American context, even if it's an independent filmmaking, that's not the case.
No, I definitely hear what you're saying. At the same time, maybe I would also defend Micklin Silver a bit as her own auteur, let's say. Maybe the obvious thing to say is, that she started in theater, that she was someone who had that theatrical identity and slipped into film in that way. She was born in Nebraska, and she was born there in 1935. So Hester Street is 1975. So she was, 38, 39, 40 when she was making that film, which is interesting because, she had this real life before. She had a husband, she had kids. She moved to New York, I think, in the late 60s, and just started to, she just was in that world. She was seeing films and so on, and she kind of slipped into the cinematic world. One of her first experiences was as a screenwriter, writing the screenplay for this movie that I think was released as Limbo, or Women in Limbo, directed by a very old Mark Robeson, way past his prime in Florida. And the experience was a kind of disillusioning for her in some sense, because Robeson changed her screenplay a lot. A lot of people intervened in the screenplay process, and eventually she was fired and replaced by someone else. But she says that Mark Robeson was at least enough of a gentleman, even though he fired her, to invite her onto the set in Florida. And when she went there, she saw that she could do a much better job, or at least she could see that he was making choices that she wouldn't make, and she was cognizant that, okay, so this is something that I could actually do.
Even without as Chris was saying, like the formal mannerisms that you can really identify throughout her career, to me there's still something, at least from the 5 or 6 films I saw, up to Loverboy, where you see like this kind of like emergent like storytelling, not necessarily throughout the narrative per se, but just like in the worlds these characters like inhabit. Like, to me it's very distinctive. Just like random passages, which in many other cases would be just like a throwaway scene, and you see like this like very like picturesque characters like on the background, or these kind of like specific interactions that to me show a lot, and show like also like a sense of place that to me is very distinctive of her hair filmmaking from what I experienced. And also I guess that also goes with like the New York experience and like the Jewish New York experience in her films. But to me, there's something there that it's kind of constantly being reframed throughout her career that to me is also quite central to understand her. And even, in some ways, to me, it's like even more interesting than seeing that just like this set of like former characteristics in a filmmaker, seeing how these sensibilities, how this like improvisatorial style, how this like world building in a way exists in different like formal landscape, from like the evocation of like the like 1920s film of like Hester Street to like the raunchy sex comedy of the 80s. Like it's in some way it's always in there to me.
I definitely agree on the sense of space, but I think in Hester Street I definitely prefer the minimal interiors to the more busy, like maybe naturalistic exteriors, because I feel like in those scenes her intentions are way too obvious. Maybe to situate the film briefly, it's in the late 19th century in Lower East Side, New York. There's this Jewish man who immigrated to America and whose name was Yankel, but who became Jake, fully Americanized, and living a quite maybe like dandy-like life in New York. But he's actually married to someone who's actually left in the old continent, and he has a son, and he brings them back to New York, and his wife and his son tries to adapt to the customs of the American life. Especially his wife, portrayed by Carol Kane, has a lot of difficulty adapting this new lifestyle. I love how she conveys the feeling of being stuck in this apartment that Yankel and his wife Yitle starts to live. And I think the street scenes kind of lose that charm, or maybe the feeling.
Yeah, I definitely shared that. I mean, I knew Joan Micklin Silver's films a little bit. I really love Crossing Delancey and Chilly Scenes of Winter also in some way. So this was also like an interesting moment for me to expand my knowledge of her work. And when I put Hester Street on, in those first few scenes, I was really, really not into it. There's something too theatrical, too caricatural in some way about those street scenes. Even if they're impressive as a kind of document, also as a kind of historical recreation, like the level of detail with the costumes, the level of detail with the props, and so on. But there's something a bit too forced about that. And then once she settles into that rhythm, and it can really be a few people in the room, and particularly, the way that this Carol Kane character develops as someone who's like very, very self-effacing and doesn't have a lot of theatrical gestures and doesn't do too much, but the way that she's able to build this really, really devastating film out of very kind of throwaway gestures, like the way that she looks with her eyes, the way she holds her body, the way she walks through a door. It's like very, very beautiful, like just that level of kind of behavioral detail. And before I knew it, I was really kind of under the film's spell in a way.
Hi, Mamie. Mamie, you should be nice to Mr. Lippman.
Why, may I ask?
Ain't you never heard of Lippman and the Vidovitz men's coats? That's the same Lippman.
What is this? The old country, huh? Is this Poland? Is this Russia?
She's 100% right, Joe. In America, you marry for love. And that's all.
How about Between the Lines? It's actually, I think, very touching from the perspective of a journalist. I mean, we're not trade journalists, but I think you also see those kind of struggles we still have, because it's about a group of journalists who work in this newspaper called Mainline. And this is, we don't know much about its past. It's only alluded through their period of heyday, where they were this more like anarchist or more independent paper, then become more mainstream, and they're now facing the acquisition of this a new buyer, which will and which ends up transforming the whole structure and line of the newspaper. So we see the perspective of all different journalists, a photographer, a rock journalist, a music journalist, and also reporters who just interviews, investigations, and so this is more like a choral film.
I mean, it's interesting and depressing that this film is from 1977 and is already about the death of journalism in some sense. So it actually, in that sense, it made me feel a little bit better, because as long as I've ever written about film, everybody's eulogizing about how everything is ending and there's a big corporate capture of everything and so on. But it's also interesting in the film that, yes, there's a corporate capture that's going to destroy the magazine, but from the start, the magazine they're already kind of spinning on their wheels, and they've already kind of lost how they used to be. So there are still good reporters there. There's still this joy in the group, but they all know that it's like that they're marked. It's not just about corporate capture, but it's also about how cultural magazine like that can sort of outstay its welcome, and how people within the paper can get disillusioned, and how changes can dislodge them from the kind of stories that they once wrote, the kind of joy that they once had, and so on.
Yeah, in that sense, I kind of saw it, seeing that like after Hester Street, I kind of see like this, I wouldn't say the same, but that this, as I mentioned, kind of like social like portrait of like a certain time, particularly as Chris was saying, there's, besides the corporate aspect, like the shifting sense of like 60s counterculture to like the 1970s, I think is very present in the film. Also, as you see with like the music critic and particularly like the Jeff Goldblum character, as this like constant dread of like losing your edge as like independent and creative, particularly in like in a cultural capital and things like that. The freewheeling and structuralist sense of the film, to me, is almost like a kind of an embrace of the kind of like attitude that like the magazine was supposed to have in a way, and seeing that in this kind of like as her like second feature length film, to me is also like quite daring in a way, because I think most of the comments I saw weren't really talking about like the plot of the film at all, just like basically like their relationship to the characters, to like this like choral sense of like world building, as I was saying. And to me that's pretty unique, and also kind of like goes to show how like Micklin Silver could like maintain that like sense of like recognizable sensibility, but also like shift it around into like different like narrative paths in a way. Because to me, like every character, like their interactions could be like their own spin-off film in a way, which is having this like collective, like a cumulative effect to me. It's like quite like impressive, and to me this one was one of my favorite ones as well.
There's less of the kind of explicit Jewishness of her first film. It's more kind of, you know, around the edges of this, but this exactly as Alonso said, this kind of communal feeling suits her so well and allows her to just perform miracles. And particularly in the relationship between Abby and Harry, played by John Hurd and Lindsay Krause, it's just, I mean, it's incredible, the stuff that you see there, and it's this exactly goes to the heart of the sense I was failing to express earlier, that she just has this kind of improvisatory, whether it was improvised or not, I don't know, but this improvisatory gift with behavior, that in the middle of a film like this, you can have a relationship like that is slippery, that pushes the film in different directions, that is just it's so impossible to characterize that. You know, there's playfulness, there's annoyance, it transforms in very, very strange ways. And that's just a tiny part of this film, but it's the whole kind of constellation of those kind of details, those kind of relationships, just keeps this film so lively, just so beautiful. And yeah, I mean, and it's a very well written film. It has a very good screenplay, but it doesn't matter in a way. It's kind of just overspilling with this beautiful, beautiful detail, beautiful Jeff Goldblum just at his peak, just playing this kind of, I don't know, just amazing sort of character, just blitzing through the middle of this film. It's like such a joy. When Hester Street was over and it was successful, and Carol Kane did get an Oscar nomination on a film that was, you know, made for nothing, that she didn't have the kind of offers coming to her that she like quote unquote should have, that a man would have had, and that she formed this company with her husband Raphael Silver. That he somehow had business sense. He had worked in films, so together they were able to produce this film and to get offers for her future films. And that's how this film came about, which is also shocking, that it wasn't something that, you know, was brought to her, but it was something that she also had to fight as a second film to get made.
To what you said about Abby and Harry's characters, I think maybe that's something you also felt while watching Chilly Scenes of Winter, because I think that's what was lacking in Charles and Laura's interactions in after they break up, in not necessarily while they meet, when they meet for the first time and they build their relationship, but rather in the later stage of their relationship. Chilly Scenes of Winter is a film about a man, Charles, who falls in love with a woman named Laura, but who is actually married but separated from her husband, but she feels guilty of quitting him. So she goes back to him, and Charles is devastated. So he tries to win her back. So basically, that's the storyline. And I think this back and forth between the past and the present tense of the film creates this imbalance between those more naturalistic, more spontaneous interactions between them in the past and their inadequacy or incapacity to communicate. And that, I think, comes mostly from Laura's character, but not necessarily because it's a underwritten character. I think I don't remember where she said, but I think because she worked more with John Hurd, maybe, I think his character is much more elaborate, and he feels more real, let's say.
Yeah, it's interesting to see like the Chilly Scenes of Winter seems to be one of her like more acclaimed films, or one of the like cinephile favorites, because to me it's kind of, I mean, I haven't seen all her films, but to me it's kind of like the least representative of what I got from her style in some way, or her like sensibility more so, particularly in this like progression towards not only more like of a character study, but also like the register to me plays along the lines of more like a 1970s like a naturalism, which to me is perhaps, yeah, so just as a sensibility thing, isn't like that interesting. Well, like, to me, it's like more commonplace within like the structures of like American independent film. So naturally, there's still like some aspects, as you were saying, particularly in the first part of the film, when the John Hurt character and Sam character do like their like like elaborate shenanigans to get like to the attention of Laura. To me, that's like has that sense of joy, that it kind of like even like formal playfulness that I kind of like look forward to in like Micklin Silver films. But yeah, I kind of struggle a little bit, like perhaps in the first watch, like reaccommodating to this kind of like tonal shift, particularly as the film progresses to like very like depressing like territory, which I think like dramatically, like it really, I mean, it works within the film, fits too well into what I associate with like, oh yeah, this is like clearly like a late 1970s like American independent film masterpiece, which I guess to me that's like less distinctive.
Yeah, if there's something that I struggle with the film, it's particularly the kind of what I would say is like cinematic devices that come from literary adaptation, such as,
what do you have?
Exactly, the blind guy says, what do you have? And his immediate response is in his mind, you know, to pour out all of the terrible things that's happening with him and Laura, and then the blind guy says, what do you have? And he has to respond. Or the moments where he looks straight to the camera and he narrates, you know, that kind of stuff is it doesn't work for me.
And there's no coherence, by the way, because sometimes he talks to camera, then we have the voiceover narration, like it's all over the place, and that was like kind of felt an ick for me, like as if she as a filmmaker didn't know how to position herself vis-a-vis the character. Like, are we inside his head, or are we observing him? What is our position? And that was really frustrating for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think I like the film more than you two. I mean, I definitely hear what you're saying, and I do feel that it's kind of marked in those senses. But you know, it was her first studio film, so I don't know what kind of forces were there to strip back some of that sort of spontaneity that you see in the earlier work, but there is this willingness in this film to go to a really dark place, at least in flashes, that is quite shocking and reminds me of, you know, what I was saying earlier about Hester Street. Is that, for example, the John Hurt character jokes about beating Laura up. He says, "I'm gonna rape you" in one moment, which doesn't go anywhere. It's just kind of left hanging in the air, deliberately, I would say. And then, you know, the other one off the top of my head is there's a moment when he's really despairing at the end, where he is watching her in a park or dropping her stepdaughter off, and he says, "Maybe I'll wait 10 or 15 years to make a move on Rebecca." And in a way, this kind of reminds me of have you seen Husbands, the Cassavetes film? Which is just like really willing to just make its own protagonists monsters, absolutely kind of hideous monsters. But in Cassavetes, I mean, that's the kind of engine that's driving the entire film, whereas here it's just these kind of flare-ups of a really kind of sociopathic character. And to me, at least, that is interesting. The fact that it's this sort of light-hearted studio film that has these moments of just genuine darkness that flare up and don't seem to go anywhere. When it was first released, it was released as Head Over Heels, retitled by the studio, and they shot a happy ending. And as I was watching it, I was imagining, you know, how could this film have a happy ending? Because, I mean, the whole film is just making this guy seem like a true sociopath. The idea that there could be a pivot at the end where him and Laura get back together would just... yeah, that's hard to contemplate. To me, I think also that's maybe part of the reason this film is so much held up as her best work, because it is really unremittingly bleak. You know, it's willing to go somewhere that a lot of films like this wouldn't. I mean, but if as it sounds like us, there's a kind of an alternate version of Micklin Silver films that we maybe prefer, I can see why this film, it doesn't do it for us in that same way, because it's really stripped of all secondary characters in a sense. I mean, there are definitely a few good ones, but it's pretty much pared back, you know. And the film, there's a late scene where he kind of chews out his boss for telling him about his son's sex life. And I don't know, I mean, I think that scene would play differently in other earlier Micklin Silver films. You know, there's not that same thing in between the lines where the relationship is kind of difficult to predict. There are certain beats being hit in this film.
I think the only maybe convincing relationship is between his roommate and Charles. I think that's what Alonso was referring to earlier.
Yeah, the Peter Riegert character. I was thinking specifically when they go to like the Laura's husband with the whole like, oh yeah, we're kind of like a couple looking for like A-frames thing. And to me, that was a thing like that. This sequence is like the kind of like Joan Micklin Silver film that I think I would really be into. But yeah, it is interesting to see that tension within the same film, I think. So to me, it's not something that, it's not a film that I would like say doesn't fully work for me. Just like a change of register that even then I find interesting to see these like full Casavetian like moments of like pure sociopathy right next to these like goofy scenes of like almost like slapstick comedy as well. So there's something to that tension within it's like with like what 95-minute film. So yeah, it's interesting to see that. Like, yeah, I think Peter Riegert kind of like steals the show for me in this film.
But I think this more grotesque, monstrous characters that are hidden behind more respectable, normal guys were also present in between the lines. When you think of Michael, the novelist, he's a douchebag, but he has a girlfriend. They have this relationship, and also the guy who hits on other Laura, who's Laura in between the lines, who's the secretary who quits first from the newspaper. They have this really intense conversation between them. She tells her that no, you tried to you'd hit on me, and he insists on that she didn't, and he didn't. And that scene, for instance, reflects how monstrous, grotesque, evil men, not maybe I'm going too much, but those men exist and they actually are hidden behind these more normal, respectful facades. And in this film, maybe it's more... And also the character in Chile in Crossing Delancey, the Anton Ryder character, maybe in a more caricatural way in the end, but I think all these are kind of like avatars or versions of this men who present themselves as nice and respectful, but I don't think she like has this idea of men are evil in their essence, but I think she really cleverly portrays this shortcomings of their characters, and especially in moral terms.
Don't start remembering about Laura. Why not? Because it drives you crazy. I am crazy. Oh, right, yeah. Go ahead. Don't worry, I'm not gonna beg her.
I was thinking about Bernice Bobs Her Hair, which is a film we didn't mention just now when we were going chronologically. When I watched that film, that there's so many delights in that, just on a minute-by-minute basis, just watching Shelley Duvall, watching Veronica Cartwright, just interacting. It's just a pure joy. And that is an adaptation of the short story by F. Scott Fitzgerald, which Micklin Silver made for PBS. They did this series of kind of literary adaptations. And it's 47 minutes, I think. So it's this kind of transitional film between Hester Street and Between the Lines. But within that, in a way, I can see how a filmmaker like Joan Micklin Silver, the seeds of her own destruction are sowed even in a very successful work like that. By which I mean, when I saw Bernice Bobs Her Hair, there's a kind of perfect modulation of her skills and her ability with actors that makes that the best possible PBS adaptation of F. Scott Fitzgerald you can imagine. And later, it's those same skills that almost like work against her when she starts making studio films, because those skills that she has are able to be kind of co-opted towards other means, because she's not necessarily a filmmaker who has a overpowering narrative sense, let's say. She's not a dominating filmmaker in that sense. She's someone who's able to sketch around the edges, like to find these small details of behavior that can really transform a film. And I think, in a way, even though Chilly Scenes of Winter is a really beloved film, it does start to move things in that direction. You can see how she would just become a good commercial filmmaker in some sense. I think maybe I'm also trying to make a segue to Crossing Delancey, which to me, also very curious to hear what you guys think about this one. But to me, that one is this kind of perfect crystallization of like the kind of commercial instinct and the Micklin Silver instinct into one. And it's also just really a personal favorite of mine in so many ways. But it feels to me this kind of like apotheosis, this kind of apex of both of those elements within her work, that she was able to make a commercial film that is a genuine kind of classic for many people, but it still had all of the things that made her so distinctive in many ways.
That intersection, as you were alluding to, like there is like naturally there's like more like a clear path narrative, like a romantic comedy structure at the heart of it, with this like three different characters, kind of like, well, the like Amy Irving character, Isabel, kind of deciding between the hot prospect of this like writer, like pretentious writer, and like the pickle salesman, which is Peter Riegert again, the Sam character. But seeing that also in what I was talking about earlier in like Between the Lines and Hester Street, with this like clear sense of space, clearly like to me it's kind of the apex of like the New York film in a way, Just the way, like, as I was saying, that like she like, just like shows these like throwaway scenes of like going to a street and seeing these like ancillary characters, and clearly it's a very like specific film of the kind of like the near Jewish experience as well. But also like the way in which it is that, to me, is also quite like evocative, because it isn't necessarily like explicit. It is very explicit in the film, but I won't say like narratively it isn't really like a part of it. Besides like the social like milieu it's like inhabiting, so it's more like this kind of like emergent sense of like setting, which to me is kind of perhaps like the definitive like expression to me of like her playfulness as well, and like also like a scene by scene basis. Just like it seems, besides having this like a linear narrative path, to me it's more about like the creative ways in which like she frames this tension between like the character's main arc and like the interactions between like the Sam character particularly. I think it's very endearing to me, and I can see, despite being like a clear-coded romantic 80s romantic comedy in many ways, there's like enough like subversions and like interesting like decisions in each scene that to me kind of like put it in a way that's like this like kind of like milestone moment. And to me it's kind of like also the most, to me those are the more interesting films, at least to my sensibility, which is like they're like under the veneer of this like very commercial or very like lowbrow or popular like kind of expression, where you can see like this like glimpses of like pure authorial intent, if you want to call it that, or just like distinctiveness in filmmaking that make it its own very specific
One
thing.
particular scene that I think I like the most in her filmography in Crossing Delancey, it's the scene where she receives the Stanton hat, because this pickle vendor is actually someone who Amy Irving's character's grandmother finds a matchmaker friend through whom she introduces this pickle vendor Sam, but obviously she doesn't want to pursue any marriage prospect through matchmaking. But then he sends this hat to her and she's so surprised, so elated, then she just runs outside to meet him. And at some point this momentarily eruption of emotion in her face, or in her eyes, that you think that she's fallen in love just in that moment. And then she sees him, and then she cuts to her face again, and you see the expressions of her face change gradually, and then he notices her, and that scene is so perfect, so interesting. It's just like so vivid and alive. I was mesmerized by that scene.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's for me at least so many moments in the film that have that, just sparkle of beauty. And I think, also when I'm just thinking about it in a general sense, it's this film that I think came in a certain moment where a film like this could exist somehow within the studio system, that's very Jewish and is full of detail of kind of Jewish life in the Lower East Side in New York, but it's still a studio comedy that still hits all those beats, and that you can imagine, as you said at the start, watching with your parents, for example. I know also that even then, this film was considered as somehow too Jewish, and that Steven Spielberg, who's married to Amy Irving, had to kind of intervene to bring the film to completion in some way. Yeah, I mean, what to say? I mean, for me, it's like a film of 1,000 small miracles in that way, and even though it does have this, like, somewhat conventional structure, there is this aliveness to so many of the scenes, like when he's dancing with her mother in the room, the scenes with the matchmaker, the scenes where she comes and he's playing, is it like handball outside with this old Jewish man smoking there. It's like, there's just so much joy there. I mean, it's really one of my favorites. It just marks this moment in Joan Micklin Silver's career, which I think is paralleled by a lot of women who are making films in the US in this kind of context at this time. The kind of energy of the 70s, in which a lot of them started to make films in a very independent way, has been subsumed into a sort of studio model. And maybe those studios stopped being so interested in them. There was this moment where they were kind of absorbed into the system briefly, and then spat out or kind of put into the least reputable. This was the moment after Crossing Delancey that I think she sort of started to go in that direction, and the kind of projects that she was offered or the films that she worked on were very much commercial.
Ooh, Bobby, look.
Who is this?
Bobby, I'm being rude.
Rude? What is rude?
Which maybe segues well to a film that you two have seen that I haven't seen.
This is the moment where we defend Loverboy, Alonso.
It's kind of insane that this film came literally 1 year after Crossing Delancey, and it was like immediate like drop off in reputation. Yeah, Loverboy, I think to describe it will be, it's kind of like if you read the description, it's kind of like a Jerry Lewis like plot in the sense that it's like there's like undergrad student that whose parents just like decide they won't pay for his tuition, so he has to go to like a pizza parlor place where he basically works there until he can pay for his tuition because he wants to get back to university to get back with his girlfriend. What happens along the way is that he finds like a secret cheat code, which is like he can like do a side hustle as a gigolo while he's delivering pizza, which becomes a kind of a code within almost like a secret cabal of like high society MILFs, which just they order like an anchovy, which is like pizza, large pizza with extra anchovies is like the secret code. So that becomes a whole thing. So they're like getting like business is booming. They're like getting all these requests because he's apparently a great lover, but more so than a great lover, which is to me kind of like the clear thing that separates this film, makes it like a very like Joan Micklin Silver film. Is like he's not really like being called upon for his like sexual prowess, but because he's like a caring man. So some of these women just call him to like dance with him, to like talk with him, to like just like have like a warm embrace. So he kind of like subverts the gigolo experience in a way, despite this being. I guess that's also like to me like the magic of this film. Just like it has the facade of like a very like raunchy like lowbrow comedy, like what would Rob Schneider will do in like the 2000s. Well, he actually did that in Those Bigelow. In this case, it also has like that, but particularly towards the end, you really get like the sense of warmth that to me like kind of characterizes like the whole Joan Micklin Silver experience.
I was really interested in how she uses the sex work as a form of connection, but also an education, because if you remember at the end, through this encounters, he also starts to discover several interests. Like he wants to learn Japanese, he learns to dance like Fred Astaire. So I think there are some interesting moments in the maybe 80s that sex work becomes this device for social ascendance or cultural ascendance for. I think there are some works that tackle this subject, and Loverboy was among them. So I thought it to be really interesting in that sense to approach sex work through a different angle that is usually been treated with. And also Patrick Dempsey, my God, what a screen persona! Like he run, and Timothée Chalamet is not even walking now. He has this really bubbly, soft energy that, and the side also the whole casting. Like there's Barbara Carrera, there's Carrie Fisher, there's so many famous people appearing in the screen. By the way, I don't think these women are MILF to today's standards. They're just like 30-somethings. So that's also an impressive vision of how society's expectations of women have changed for the better, maybe, let's say. But yeah, I think it's a nice comedy of misunderstanding.
That choral aspect that we were saying between the lines, to me, it's clearly in here as well, because you have like Patrick Dempsey at this like kind of like I don't know, like on the pantheon of like the best cinematic twinks of all time. But also you have like just like his friend that beats apart, where he's like, this is like a kind of this sleazy like bleach hair character, like always horny but never like, kind of like projecting his fantasies through Patrick Dempsey. And also, which I know might be like a problematic depiction, but the Italian character I find very funny despite being like explicitly like an ethnic caricature.
Yeah. I mean, there are some really bad humor in this film, especially about homosexuality, about Japanese women like being perceived as geishas. So that she obviously uses all these cultural cliches, but once you're on board, I think
it is very Jerry Lewis in that sense as well.
Wow, you two came alive talking about that film in a way that none of the other films seem to animate you.
Still care for the craft of filmmaking in a way that perhaps would stop being so like later down the line, but clearly like preempting this like cheap comedy, as you would call it perhaps. But to me, it's also like the final sequence, like the cross montage that's happening while there's like the former lovers and husbands of the woman that are like soliciting the services of the Patrick Dempsey character. They kind of like create their own kind of like alliance to like beat him down. That's happening simultaneously. What like Patrick Dempsey's mother is being like chased by the Italian guy, while simultaneously Patrick Dempsey is trying to like get his girlfriend back. And this is like happens like in a cross-cutting sequence that is out of like Griffith, for example. It's just like incredible what's happening.
There we go.
It has like a conclusion, wow, which is like the Tiki like place, which is like a beat down sequence, like it's straight up like a fight choreography. And after a fight choreography, you have like a musical scene, and it's just like all of cinema is within this like final 20 minutes.
It's a lot of pull quotes from that that speech you just gave, Alonso.
Senior Pizza.
Come in. Can you put it on the table, please?
Hi. Hi.
I hope you didn't leave your car parked in the red zone this time.
No.
Please sit down.
Oh, yes, definitely. Oh, except, see, I got this big delivery to make.
In Costa Mesa?
That's the thing, you can say about Joan Micklin Silver, even when she was, slumming it in the trenches of Made for TV. The casts were always there. I mean, she even in that period, she worked with Sissy Spacek as well, for example. But yeah, there was this last kind of gasp of what we would kind of recognizably call a Joan Micklin Silver film, which is A Fish in the Bathtub. If you're a fan of Seinfeld. It's like a pretty irresistible film, even though within 5 minutes you realize that it's not an episode of Seinfeld because it stars Jerry Stiller essentially playing his role as George's dad from Seinfeld, but without any jokes or without any good jokes, I should say. If I put my auteurist hat on and look at the main films from Joan Micklin Silver's career, you can somehow fit this in. Thematically, I know that's not our favorite area to dig into, but in a lot of Joan Micklin Silver's films, there is this focus on the disintegration of relationships. But there's this in all of her best films, this tension where the main characters are stuck between sort of tradition and the future, and that can destroy them in some sense, like the newspaper people in Between the Lines, the Carol Kane character in Hester Street, in Crossing Delancey, the very moving Amy Irving character's arc as someone who is sort of trying to escape their Judaism in a sense within the confines of a studio comedy. And in A Fish in the Bathtub, which is a little bit like a sort of Hester Street but 100 years later, it's a film about this couple played by like Jerry Stiller and Ann Mira, who are a real life couple who are Ben Stiller's parents and who were comedians together in the 60s, 70s. And so it's amazing to see them here because they play husband and wife who after 40 years just decide to throw in the towel. And why did they decide to throw in the towel? Because he is comically awful. in a similar way to earlier Joan Micklin Silver films, that the male character is kind of above and beyond in their awfulness. That she's willing to, in a kind of film like this, to depict someone who is so awful, so repugnant, and so lacking in any kind of redemption, at least until the very end.
I think you're right about Jerry Stiller's character in that sense, because my motivation was also like, I've been also watching a lot of Seinfeld recently, and Jerry Stiller is like literally playing himself, and if you want to like the whole humor of
he's playing the kind of character from Seinfeld. I don't want to slander him.
No, but like the whole humor is based on that, actually. Like his mannerisms, his comedy timing through his acting is actually a reference to that. And it's, I think, like period wise is also right after Seinfeld ended, right? Or like at near the end of the show.
Yeah.
So it's more like a Jerry Costanza spin-off kind of thing. But I think there's this... The film starts with a really dramatic, expressive lightning, and so you get this tone of, wow, what is it going to be? The film opens very in an artsy way, let's say. And then I think I had some difficulty engaging with the conflict between the characters, because I mean that should, I mean, probably the fish in the bathtub should be nonsensical, because that's not a reason to like separate what's or whatever. But I think the build up toward that moment, that conflict, really wasn't well executed. And then there's this also the Mark Ruffalo's character. There's this also the plot of him and his wife, which is also kind of where they maybe was there to like support or to maintain the balance or give that choral feeling to maybe broaden the storyline a bit. I enjoyed, because I like Jerry Stiller, but I mean that's just a gig, like a thing in the film.
Yeah, I think you also see it, you know, for example, when you look at late films by Leo McCarey or somebody like Leo McCarey, that when they haven't got their full engagement with the material and they can't, you know, generate so much spontaneity from it, you end up with situations that look like the old stuff, but lacks the kind of joy and specificity. And I think the Mark Ruffalo and Missy Yeager relationship has that, you know, because he has all the makings of a Joan Micklin Silver character. He's lies to his wife, he fantasizes about other women, and so on and so on. And he essentially tries to initiate an affair, but pulls out of it at the last minute. But it's much lighter here, you know. She's unwilling to go towards that darkness. It's there in the Jerry Stiller character for sure. I mean, it's hard to make me hate Jerry Stiller, but it's easy to hate him in this film because he is extremely abusive towards his wife in so many scenes. But again, she's just happy to kind of keep it on a light level here. You know, it's like lightly entertaining. No real jokes. It's just sort of floating along. You're right about the fish in the bathtub. That's the kind of that gives the whole game away, because the film is named after that, and you really feel like it's going to be working towards this kind of something with that fish is symbolic or ties the narrative together or whatever. And instead, no, it just kind of peters off. Like she just kind of loses interest in that.
How about some cookies, fresh from the oven?
Just ring up the buns.
Come out in a storm like this for 2 measly bucks. Tell me, mister, you married?
You think my mother would send me out on a night like this?
Oh, there's also a film that's not related to Fish in the Bathtub, but I wanted to watch a short film that she wrote for Barbara Loden. And I just learned it today, and I was like, oh.
The Frontier Experience, is that the one?
I have actually seen that movie. I didn't know that was written by Joan Micklin Silver.
Yeah, I think from what I haven't seen the film, but from what I saw, from what I read, it's also one of the like educational like mirror films.
Yeah, I mean, it's this. From what I remember, the Frontier Experience is this very, it's really amazing, vivid short film where Barbara Loden also plays the main character. And it's set on the Kansas frontier in 1869. But I mean, I particularly remember it as a kind of written object. What I really remember is that there are these really vivid Western images in that film. Because I can see that it was produced by the Learning Corporation of America, but I'm not sure that it was actually related to that first film by Joan Micklin Silver, which was also an educational film. That's interesting. It's good that we're ending this conversation with a more open-ended, cheerful note rather than
depressive, late period.
Yeah, but I think maybe it's. Maybe the last thing I will say on this is that to go back to Oku's original question or comment about Joan Micklin Silver, I mean, this is exactly why I think a filmmaker like her is worth digging into. I mean, not just for these highs that she made, but also to try and survey someone who was, like, for better and for worse, marked by a specific time and marked by not a specific, but a variety of periods of filmmaking, and was only able to make films due to certain circumstances and in a very contingent way, and then was sort of absorbed by certain systems. So I think it's definitely worth defending her on those grounds, and I'm sorry that I couldn't join you in this rapturous Loverboy discussion that you had.
He's probably some young Beach Boys stud with a name like Jason.
Yeah, some poetry reading whip. Whoever he is, he's gonna get his face stomped.
You shake my nerves and you rattle my brain. About your love drives a man insane. You broke my will, the blood of freedom. Disgrace is baseball's pie.
Before we wrap up this episode, let's talk about some other films that we've been watching lately. Alonso, do you want to go first?
Honestly, I haven't watched any recent film that I've liked that isn't related to a podcast. Well, I kind of like I could mention like Parks and Walk's film, but no other choice.
What is that rating, Alonso? 2.5 and a heart. What is that?
When I just saw that, I thought that you were fucking with us. I thought that was a wink towards us. Because we had been talking before this podcast about Alonso's kind of unhinged rating system. And we talked about how, a 3 stars for Alonso is like this tea leaves or like a Rorschach test that it can be a masterpiece or it can be a kind of dismissal of a canonical film. And so as we were ruminating about this, suddenly an Alonso rating comes and it's 2.5 and a like, which just seems like like you're pushing it.
Oh, to me that's actually, I always tell people that's like the best rating the film can have. Because to me it means it's like the most interesting kind of art, which is something I'm kind of on the fence of, and it's kind of like erratic in a way that I'm not truly on board with. But at the same time, there's like enough there that I'm like rooting for the film. So like the overall experience is something that I enjoy, or something like I would like for it to commit a little bit more. In the case of the Parks and Walk film, it's just like it has enough like jarring formal mannerisms and like what I would say like almost like abrasiveness in how it's like constructed, that I really enjoyed it. But at the same time, at times it's like almost too much like a prestige TV like structure that I kind of like bounce off of fully like embracing it. But I think I've never been like a Parks and Walk guy as well. Like he's too like stylish and too ornate for me. On this one, like when it goes to like the dark comedy and to like the more like lowbrow aspects of like his formal construction, it almost wins me over. So I guess that's me justifying that rating. But again, I rate for myself. So
Oiku, did you have something you've been watching lately you wanted to talk about?
I've been watching some early Bertolucci's. Because I think every cinephile has probably seen the major Bertolucci's, including Last Tango in Paris, like Il Conformista. But I never watched the early ones before the Revolution, the Spider Stratagem. I watched Grim Reaper 10 years ago, and I didn't remember much about it. So I did a rerun of these, and it's interesting. It's exciting because he's, I think, at an early age, a filmmaker who had clear intentions of what type of cinema he wanted to make. Even there are some formal insecurities, what direction, what type of movement or space he wants to use in his cinema. And when you see that early depictions in his films, it's a strong voice. So I enjoyed watching those films?
I haven't seen those films. I haven't actually seen any Bertolucci films. He's a huge gap for me. I mean, he was one of those people that, when I became a cinephile, it was quite messy, and I had much more knowledge about some things and almost nothing about others. And he just I was like, oh, is today the day I watch Il Conformista? No, and then at some point it's just like, that's why I was trying to coax you guys into a Bertolucci episode, so I finally had an excuse. But maybe one day. What have I been watching? I mean, besides Joan Micklin Silver, I've been watching some Malayalam films because I'm working on a text about Malayalam cinema, so cinema from the South Indian state of Kerala for Kaidu Cinema. And when I've been watching these films, it's been interesting because it's like a glimpse into a world of cinema that virtually nobody that I know has seen, despite the fact that the films are immensely popular. Because of course, in Kerala they speak Malayalam rather than that's the Indian language that they speak. So they have their own sort of quasi-national cinema in Kerala. And they produce a lot of films. And if you ask Indian cinephiles, I think it's fair to say that they believe that Malayalam cinema is where the fun is at. But maybe to outsiders, it's a very strange, a very different kind of cinema that is not, and I'm talking about popular cinema here, that isn't what maybe outsiders would perceive as like normal, quote unquote, Indian cinema. That no singing and dancing. The films aren't all 3 hours, although a lot of them are. They're very, local and specific, with very specific Malayalam stars that are maybe not that well known in the rest of India. And yeah, I've been enjoying watching these movies, and they have 25,000 people on Letterboxd have logged them, and none of my friends. But if I wanted to give some recommendations, I'm not going to try and read the Malayalam titles, but there's a film called Ayapunam Koshiyom, which is this very strange 3-hour Western about a cop and a criminal sort of at the start having some confrontation and spending the whole film one-upping each other by destroying each other's property. Very strange film, but very interesting. Or I'm also watching a film called Kumbalangi Nights, which is, again, a film that literally none of my friends on Letterboxd have seen. But it's like one of the most popular Malayalam films from recent years. And it's like, you look at all the reviews online and everybody's giving it 5 stars and calling it a classic, but for me, it's also this kind of very much an insight into the popular culture of Kerala. I don't know. Maybe the last film I could recommend, which is a truly amazing film that I know more people outside of India have seen, which in Malayalam is called Nanpakal Neratu Mayakam, which translates to something like an afternoon's dream. And it's this kind of feels like a remake of Shimizu's Mr. Thank You, although I doubt that that's an explicit connection. And it's directed by Ligio Jose Pellisseri, who directed Jallikattu, this film about the bull. Quite a well-traveled film. And that's an amazing film about sleep and buses and community. And it's really, a truly amazing film. And the interesting thing about Malayalam films is that a lot of them are available on Netflix, a lot of them are available on Amazon, so they're very easy for people to watch with subtitles. So yeah, I guess that would be my kind of out of left field recommendation.
If you have any recommendations, fan letters, hate letters, whatever you want to send us, don't forget to send them at outskirtsfilmmagazine@gmail.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Spotify. And this episode will be available on every platform for podcasts. I think. And the films we discussed in this episode also will be available on Letterboxd profile, which you can follow. And most importantly, don't forget to buy your copy of the new issue on outskirts.com.